go live now, as we are already live. So I will give a brief introduction of the session and then hand it over to both experts who will engage in a conversation. So this is not a typical interview format today. So both of them have done tremendous work in their own fields. So let me welcome you all to this Global Development Dialogue series, where we are celebrating Children's International Children's Week from 14th November to 21st of November. And on today, we have a very interesting panel as part of this series of Child and SDG. Very few people think about children, how they are doing in real life, and how literature reflects them. Literature talks about them, and literature talks about them, not just to them, but to also to adults like us. Does it talk about people say Tare Zameen Par as a movie was not about children on children for children, but it is about children on children for adults. So kind of that. So Ramendra Kumar is the best known Indian around the world on children and children's life and writing and experiences. He brings in his decades of experience, dozens and dozens of books and materials, and thousands of training programs that he has done, conducted, addressed several top literary festivals around the world. So we are very, very fortunate to have Ramendra Kumar here to have a discussion and engage with another youth icon, Sujit Mahapatra, who is the founder secretary of Bakul. So today, before I hand it over to both our gentlemen who are legends in their own way to talk about children, let me thank our honorable MP sir to have created this opportunity and platform to deliberate upon issues and children. So on behalf of Kalinkusum Foundation, on behalf of Sri Sri University, on behalf of Xavier University, who are knowledge partners with this platform, I thank profusely to Honorable MP Sujit Kumar inviting and conceptualizing this kind of a weekly focus on children. Thank you. Over to Ramendra Kumar and Sujit Mahapatraji for a conversation on children for us and for them as well. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dash, and thank you very much. My namesake, I am Sujit Mahapatra, not Sujit Kumar. So our honorable MP and our beloved MP, Sujit ji, for giving me this opportunity to engage in this very important global development dialogue, which he and his team have been engaging all of us with, and I have been following them. And I'm very happy that the second series of these dialogues have been on children and the SDGs and the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of these goals we often, they come and go, and then we make new goals. But the question then is, what is the point? So I think it's good that we keep reminding ourselves. Otherwise, maybe we would have been having this discussion 2 years before 2030. It's good that we're having this discussion 10 years before 2030, and so that there is, we work towards it. And education is something which is so important, so at the base of everything that we do. Of course, when we talk about education in times of pandemic, it's very funny, just before we this session started, I found a joke shared in one of the WhatsApp groups, which said, we used to make fun of our grandmothers when they said, "School ja rahe ho, school jao cha." Okay, and now for the first time in history, the pandemics have always happened. For the first time in history, there's a generation of children whose first experience of school has been e-school.
E-school.
Exactly. So it's kind of funny times that we are really living in. But we'll talk about technology, we'll talk about those aspects. But just to repeat, the goal of SDG for education, which is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and to promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So I think within this context, we will have our discussion, this very important discussion about children and literature. I'm very happy that we have Ramendra ji, with whom my association goes back more than 10 years. He has been he's the best person that we turn to when we look for storytellers. He's the best person we turn to when we look for parenting tips, and for many other things. So, Ramendra ji, let us begin with, first, maybe we can just start about, you as a writer, and then we'll go into these serious discussions.
Yeah, I would like to tell two important words before that. Jai Jagannath.
Jai Jagannath. Right. In fact, for those of you who don't know, Ramendra ji has also written a children's book on the story of Lord Jagannath, right? And it's in English, or it's also translated into...
It's in English, Hindi, and Odia.
Yeah.
In English, it is called Tales of Lord Jagannath.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, we have that at our library where I'm sitting.
Yes.
So, Ramendra ji, you have written so many books. I mean, one of the most prolific, and not just prolific, from the best of publishers. Your stories have been in school syllabus, not only in India, in Sri Lanka and many other places, been translated into many languages. And you've already written, what, more than 70 books? How many?
No, the number of books is 39.
Okay.
And my work has been translated into 29 languages.
So okay, my number comes close. But how did this journey start? Maybe, I mean, you have told me this, but I think our listeners would definitely like to know about how did this journey of being a writer start?
Yeah, see, I am never ever tired of repeating this, because this is my favorite questions, because it concerns my most favorite person. So when I was around 7 years, I wrote my first poem, and it went like this. Topsy and Tim went for a swim. Topsy swam well and broke the spell. Tim swam badly and went home sadly. Now, I was very proud. What a lovely creation, I've, managed to indulge in, or whatever creativity I managed to indulge in. So in my spidery scrawl, I took it to my father. I thought my father would say, what is this silly fellow? Instead of, studying maths, algebra, geometry, like Putul, Mr. Chadda's son, you are writing silly poetry. Or he would have said, it's okay, but you could have done better. He didn't do any of these things, Sujit. What he did was, he picked me up, gave me a tight hug, and said one word. And that word was wonderful. And today, if I'm a writer, 38 books, 29 translations, blah, 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 and all, it is because of that one word and that one gesture of hugging me and giving me that encouragement. And it is my appeal to all parents to be like that, to be that positive in their approach towards their children. Be as empathetic as possible. See from the point of view of the little child, 7-year-old fellow who has written some nonsense, and he comes to you. Instead of criticizing him or correcting him, what you do is you say wonderful, you hug him, and you make him a writer for life.
This story, whenever you tell me, because of course, since we have been interacting on many platforms, I have heard this earlier, and whenever you tell me this story, I actually go on an introspection mode. So I always ask, well, I don't have children, but I work with children, and I always hope, that someday I want someone to tell in an interview or in a session like this that he became not necessarily a writer, but whatever. He wanted to become this because of a pat frost, because of some encouraging words, or because I did something which really took him on that path. I really hope all of us who are listening to this, introspect, and I hope that no one ever says that this person stopped me from becoming what I wanted to become, from fulfilling my destiny, but I overcame that. I would rather want that all of us feature in the stories of your father, the way your father features in your story. So that is something I would really want from everyone. But that's an interesting point that you mentioned. The first fear that you had, that your father would probably shout at you saying, why are you wasting your time? Why are you doing this, silly poems and all? Why are you writing? And I'll tell you, it's been 13 years to the Bakul library now in Bhubaneswar that we started, and there are more libraries that we started. But then very often when children come to a library and they say that, our parents don't want us to go because they feel it is wastage of time.
Wastage of time.
So do you think, what is the role of literature vis-a-vis education? Because a lot of people feel that education is what happens in the school, that happens in the classroom, the textbooks, the curriculum. Yeah, stories, fiction, all this doesn't really help you in any way. So I think maybe you can talk a little about where you see is the role of literature in, the notion of education.
I would say that literature, not only in the notion of education, literature in the notion of life. For instance, I always request the parents to tell their child stories, especially during bedtime, because that's the time when they are free. Now, why do I say that? When I'm telling my child, my daughter, a story, we are sharing a space, same space, physical space. Apart from that, she's hearing my voice. She's seeing my expressions. She's cuddling up to me. And we are I'm reading up to her the same story, and she's imagining. Now, suppose both of us are sitting and watching Chota Bheem. There's nothing to imagine. Chota Bheem is the same Bheem for her, Chota, and the same Chota Bheem for me. But when she's listening to my story and I'm telling her, once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a king. Now to her, the king might be a tall, mustachioed guy, or a short fellow, portly fellow, or a fellow who's very thin, fellow sitting on a throne or sitting on an elephant. So it stirs up the creativity and it stirs up the imagination. And most important of all, you're sharing a bond. Today, I'm telling my child a story about, say a lion. Tomorrow she goes to the zoo, and then she asks me, Papa, you told me a story of a lion in that the lion was very, very fat and big and huge, but this lion is so small. So that connect is there. She's connecting with me, I'm connecting with her. So this connect is endless. This emotional bonding you will never find while you're sitting and watching a Netflix series or Amazon series or television or working on the internet together. This you'll find through the medium of story, imagination, creativity, and the deep bond. Then through stories, you can explain so many things. I always believe that stories have to be very entertaining. Otherwise, the child would lose interest, child or adult or the reader. So, but in that process of entertainment, can we not have a small, tiny value, tucked in somewhere so that it is not forced, it is not preachy, it's not moralistic. You should do that, Sujit. No. In that process of storytelling, the value comes out. The value is internalized, imbibed by the child. Let me give you an example of a filmmaker, I've told you earlier also, whom I adore, who I think is the best filmmaker India has ever had, Rishikesh Mukherjee. All his films had great entertainment, extremely good plots and everything else, and they had always a value. So entertainment and value. The best way of teaching a child life lessons is through stories because they're interesting, they are fun, they're entertaining, and they can help you imbibe a lot of values.
In fact, it's a very important point you raised about values. We'll come back to that in the discussion later. But I'll just, many interesting points you raised. This is a question that, of course, given that our library promotes reading and we have been working on promoting reading, this is also a question that I've often been grappling with. And I have unfortunately come to the conclusion that the biggest problem with education is our notion of what is education. That we've narrowed it down to this only, and, the thing is, and while you were talking about creativity and curiosity and all, I was just thinking about it. Einstein, and recently, you might be aware that we are running this Bakul talks about Nobel prizes. And when we talked about the Nobel Prize in Physics, one of these Tuesdays, we talked about Albert Einstein. And I quoted Albert Einstein's, one of his statements I really love. So a mother asked Einstein that I want my son to be a scientist. What tip would you give? And Einstein said, I want you to read him fairy tales. She said, you're joking. I asked a very serious question. And then he said, that is why I'm giving a very serious answer. Okay, and he said that, what is the best way to develop imagination and creativity? It is through fairy tales. And then the question came, okay, how do I make him even more intelligent? And he says, read him more fairy tales. So, we always, think that, and there was another point where Einstein also said that I don't teach, I create the conditions for the person to learn.
Absolutely.
And that is something I think we need to keep in mind very much, because very often, again, unfortunately, I feel that learning often happens in India when teaching ends. Because we believe that the purpose of education is to teach, but that is not the purpose of education. The purpose of education is to create learners, create lifelong learners, which is what the SDG talks about. And I think, and falling in love with books, and that is something all of us, both of us have often talked about, that it is so important for us to create an interest and love for books in a child. Because if you create a love for books in the child and provide access, now access is an important point in all the SDGs, provide access. So if we create libraries, we ensure that books are there, that the child can access, then the child will take care of herself. We don't need to, as you said, constantly force it down the throat of the child. So, these are so important. And it was very also important, the point you made about the difference between television or seeing something on the big screen and reading in a book. Because, people have said that if I want to do propaganda, nothing like the cinematic medium, because I can reach out at one go to thousands of people. But as you said, your vision of Chhota Bheem and your daughter's vision of Chhota Bheem is the same. You don't imagine differently. So even if nowadays people are becoming more visual, like in social media, visual content is working more. But I think still, I'm sure you will also agree that to create interesting visual content, to think out of the box, you need to be a reader, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that is something, unfortunately, but tell me something a little about your experience, because I remember you telling me that you started writing for children when you started creating stories for your children.
Yeah, that's actually...
That's the story of your writing for children. And in the process, can you also tell about how you feel their education developed because of the storytelling that you were doing to them?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So my daughter was around 4. I used to write satire then, so political satire and all that. When my son happened, now my wife and I both work in a steel plant. So my wife's hands were completely full, a baby in the house, plus a 4-year-old daughter and household chores, going to the steel plant and working there and all. So she encouraged me a lot. She said, Ramin, you're a useless fellow. You can't wash clothes. You can't run a dishwasher. You can't sing lullabies. You can't wash bums. The least you can do is to tell stories to Ankita while I take care of Aniket, our son. So that was a challenge for me. So I said, okay, let me tell stories. Now I am an egoist. I said, why should I tell stories from the Panchatantra or Katha Sarita Sagar or Jataka tales? Let me create my own stories. So I started telling her these tiny tales and she lapped them up. She loved them. Now I'm not very sure it was the content or it was just me jumping around, singing and dancing and making funny faces and all. But when she loved those stories, I typed out those stories, sent them to magazines, they started getting published, and that's how the journey began. Then came my son. When he grew up to around say 2.5 or 3. Now it became a challenge. My daughter, the kind of story she liked was, once upon a time, long, long ago, there lived a beautiful princess. She fell in love with a tall, dark, handsome prince. Suddenly, a Rakshasa entered, and the prince, using his ingenuity, intelligence, and creativity, captured the Rakshasa and put him inside a tower and sealed it. And the princess got married, and they lived happily ever after. And for my son, I had told him that our family guru is Bruce Lee. So we had a big poster. Every morning he would get up and he would say, Pranam Bruce Lee. He liked action. Spider-Man, then Superman, Iron Man, and God knows how many other man, except Padman, because Padman was not invented then. He loved action. So as far as he was concerned, in the second or third sentence, the hero should be starting dishum dishum with the villain. And by the time the story ended, the the villain's kidney should be flying out of the window, his ear should be pulled off, his head should be corkscrewed and all that, and blood and gore and mayhem. So between Once Upon a Time, Long, Long Ago, and Dishum Dishum, my stories balanced. Fortunately, I could satisfy both these demands, and that's how I continue to be a writer. So imagine, Sujit, on cold winter evenings, summer twilights, rain-drenched afternoons, Ankita, Aniket, and I created this magic and wonder of storytelling as we went through the labyrinth, the beautiful corridors of our creativity, of our imagination. I don't think I will ever forget those moments, nor will they ever do. And what were the values we were talking about? I'll give you a simple example. Empathy is one very strong value which I feel every child should know. And we can discuss about it later. But we have always been, in many of my stories, I've talked about empathy. Sometime back, what happened was that there was a man who had killed a pup, beaten it to death because it had uh, dirtied his auto rickshaw. So now there was a Ankita's classmate is here. She went to the police who were not getting, they were not caring, they were not bothered. She even wrote to Maneka Gandhi, the response was just coming. So I told Ankita, she's very popular on Instagram, as you know. So she put up an Instagram post and the internet was flooded with that. I sent her the pictures of the dead pup and the man and all that. Instagram was flooded with that, and that culprit was brought to book. He was actually taken to jail and fined. So what I'm saying is, this is empathy. And how did this value of empathy come? It came through my stories to my children.
And that's a very important point, because I remember when I studied literature. Now, even the Shylock, and you read Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, you try to humanize Shylock. You don't just see things as people as black and white.
Black and white, yeah.
In today's time, when the world gets polarized, I think it's very important that we have empathy for people. In fact, a lot of people have talked about it, that, what we really need to educate our children in is empathy, because information you can get on, if you have access to technology, if you have access to books. Unfortunately, in Orissa, many people still do not have that. But if you have that, then you don't need school, you don't need teachers. In fact, in the West, where technology and access, the problem is solved, they think about, why do we need teachers? Why do we need schools? But, technology cannot give you empathy. Cannot really, so it's stories, it's relationships that you develop with people.
I would like to come in here. It's an extremely important point you have raised, Sujit. In Denmark, they have empathy classes called Klassensted. Once a week, for an hour, 6 to 16-year-olds are taught empathy. And how do they learn empathy? They are together. They are never competing. There is no competition for maths or science or 100 meters or long jump or high jump. They are just together. And in that, suppose I'm weak in maths. Sujit, who's very good in maths, helps me. Sujit is not so good in vocabulary, so I help him. So the strengths and weaknesses, they are together. They are, seamlessly, they move together so that they believe that each of us should discover the best version of ourselves rather than compete with each other. And they teach camaraderie, they teach cooperation, they teach teamwork. In our schools, there is a very popular school in Rourkela. It's got branches across the country. At the back of the book, it is written, that we teach our children to be competitive. We teach them skills so that they grow up as very competitive adults in this world, which is full of competition and blah, blah, and all. So I wanted to tell them, bloody idiots, donkeys, are you are you living in the caves where the only way a person could get his girl or his meat was by hitting his opponent with the club on his head and dragging his girl and dragging the meat away? This is not that age. This is an age of competition. No, it's the age of camaraderie. It's the age of living together, not competing like savages. But that is the tragedy. And in India, many schools or boards are into this kind of a thing. That day I was reading that for getting admission into nursery, you have coaching classes. And for getting admission into those coaching classes, you have entrance exams. Why, what is happening? Are we in the jungles or what? I mean, it's so insane.
And that's really sad, because I don't blame the schools so much, because the parents seem to want it. The schools are in the business of education, and they probably think that they will get their customers if they play to this. Many children have told us that our parents will not allow us to go to the library to read. But if you organize competitions, we will go. And as a policy, sir,
they want that certificate.
And as a policy, you've known that that is why we never organize competitions. We rather believe in doing workshops where they can learn and they can be co-learning. So like we had workshops on writing with you, with other people, on art. Like when we did public art, then people asked that, okay, won't you give prizes? I said, every day people will pass the walls and give a prize.
That's a prize.
Why do we need to give a prize? And why should we bring that this is bad? Because what if your father had compared your poem with two others and said, you are third, you are no good. But obviously because your poem must have been less good at that point in time compared to some other people. Definitely. But because of that wonderful, you excelled. So I think that is something that we need to understand, that to this competition. And because I think most of us here, we all guilty. I'll tell you something. My nephew, I don't think my sister was very amused. My nephew got some decent marks and in his exams. And then I told him and his mother, I said, now that you have done the regular stuff, don't stop yourself from your pursuit of excellence. Because how does it matter? How does it matter? I don't even remember who was my topper in class 1. We are so stuck up on class 1 mein tune top nahi kiya. Things like that. So, I mean, that is really sad. And I'll tell you my story, because I want to tell the viewers also. Now, Ramendra sir has been talking about his daughter, Ankita. Now, she is a social media influencer. She is a travel content creator with a huge following on Instagram, as he was saying. Now, when I see her, I see she's doing out of the box stuff. Now, and I think, okay, how is she creating? Now, she's someone who grew up in Rourkela. Okay, we normally see people from the metros or from other places doing it. Now, she is someone with the similar background compared to most of us. It is this, education that happened through stories where anything can happen, where you have, a fairy tale mixed with a superhero story. That a fairy tale need not be like this. A superhero story need not be like this. You're creating new content. So I think in a way, you did the best thing by not repeating stories that they would have got otherwise, but by showing them how you can create, original stuff. And I think that is what they're doing. And
actually, Sujit, the credit should go to my kids. They have fantastic memories. By chance, every night I had to tell them a new story. If I was repeating a particular thing, suppose I was repeating a blue-colored Rakshas, Aniket would say, Papa, ये तो तुम सुनाए थे ना, blue-colored Rakshas? हमको बुद्धू बना रहे, पुरानी कहानी सुना रहे. And once what happened was, we had gone to Goa. So my wife and I were on the beach and we were watching the sunset. It was all very romantic and all. Ankita was 11 and Aniket was 7. So Aniket told Ankita Aniket was at that age where the dad is the hero. Ankita, Papa can create a story on anything. So Ankita said, no. He's a good writer, he's a good storyteller, but anything, no. What is this chamcha you are? He said, no, he can. So Ankita looked here and there, she picked up a pebble. And then she said, let us ask Papa if he can create a story on a pebble. Aniket said, yes, he can. And I was watching the sunset in a romantic mood and all, and suddenly a pebble is thrust under my chin. And Ankita says, Papa, by tomorrow morning, we want a story on a pebble. I said, Harry, are you crazy or what? I've come here to relax and enjoy and all that. And on a pebble, it said, Papa, लिख दो मेरी इज्जत का सवाल है. So while they were enjoying in the hotel and all that, I was thinking up and all, and believe it or not, in a few hours, I wrote a story called A Pebble on the Beach, which also won an award. So that was the kind of impetus I got from my children. So it is a kind of a circle,
Yeah, definitely.
It's a kind of a circle.
In fact, I would like to you to talk more about the process of how you develop stories, like you mentioned just now, and what kind of stories you write. But before that, I would just want to share my personal experience.
Please.
I tell you, I think, when I reflect back on my school days, I think all the subjects that I was good at because I was trying to escape studies. I tell you, my mother obviously wanted me to see me with the textbook. Okay, but how long will you sit with the same boring textbook? Okay, so I actually started reading fiction to run away from the textbooks. So what I would do, which many people do, I would cover the fiction with a cover, either that, or I would hide it inside the textbook.
Yes.
And I would thank my parents for that I started reading fiction. Okay, initially it was not because I love fiction. Then I became a lover of fiction, literature. But my love started because I was running away from studies. Now, the other thing that happened is I started reading newspapers because I wanted to avoid the textbook. Okay. I started reading newspapers. Now, the difference here, the point that I want to make to our viewers is this was out of interest, out of curiosity, not because it was being forced to me. Now, because I started reading newspapers and fiction, my language skills developed. Not only that, because I read the newspaper on a daily basis, I actually never had to study my ICSE civics book, because all that they taught there, it was covered. If you read the newspapers for a year or two, all the questions are, who administers the oath of office to the governor, who does this, who does that, all of that. Secondly, when I would sit down with the Nancy Drews and the Hardy Boys and novels, I would sit down with an atlas to know where they're traveling, where are those cities.
Great.
That way, in ICSE, 60% of our marks in geography could be answered from maps. So I realized that all the subjects I was good at in school, it was because I was trying to run away from. And later on in my life, I realized that I actually learn more when I'm given a task to do something, maybe write a report, read and create something, rather than when I'm just mugging up for an exam. I think that all of us need to understand that information, how does it matter? Information, if we don't have to today, we can get tomorrow. But do we have the basic skills? True. And that is something which is unfortunately, I for my living, I teach young people. I work with very small children as a volunteer, but I work with people who are aspiring for a career in law or management at a later stage, graduation, after that. And the sad thing is, now, तुमने तो पढ़ लिया, तुम engineering कर लिए, सब कुछ कर लिया, अब management करना है, और तुम्हें US जाना है, GRE देना है, and now you figure out you have to work on your reading skills, reading comprehension. Such an irony, I feel. I always laugh at these people, at these young people, but I don't blame them. It is what as parents, or as not just parents, even mentors, the society. I think Kamala was mentioning, it takes a village to, bring up a child. I think the role of this village, each of us, is very important. That even if it is not our own children, are we, really making them lifelong learners, which is the purpose of, the SDG in education? Are we creating readers? Are we creating an interest in learning? Or are we just trying to feed them information which can happen anytime? But, we'll come back to these topics. Tell us a little more about, like this, you said about the pebble on the beach. Tell us a little more about how do your stories happen? Is it always Is it always कि हमेशा आप अनिकेत का नाक कटने से बचा रहे?
No, there are so many ways. But see, most of the stories I've got are from my children. And now that they've flown the nest, from other kids around me. So there is one story which I wrote. My father was staying with us, and Aniket was around uh, 7 or 8, 7 then. And he used to call my father Apuchi because we used to call him Babuji. He couldn't. So when he was 1 or 2, he started lisping and he called him Apuchi. So he was very close to my father. My father would take him around everywhere on holidays, and when he had holidays and we had office. So once we had some issues with my father, as it happens in many joint families, my father got a bit irritated. The fault was entirely mine. And my father said, okay, I'm going and I'll be staying with his brother in Lucknow. So he left. So then Aniket kept asking, when is he going to come back? When is he going to come back? So we kept telling him that he's going to come back soon and all. And then over phone, they would talk and all that. So then as happens, especially during those days, it was, I think, class 3 exam or class 2 exam. We told Aniket, if you top, we'll get you a cycle. Very stupid of us, but we are also a part of the system. We were a part of the system rather. So he worked very hard, but he came second and he missed the rank by 1 mark or something. So my wife and I decided, doesn't matter, we will still get him a bike and let it be a surprise. So we got him a bike. He had no idea. I and my wife went and we got him a bike, and it was yellow in color with a red band here and all. It was a snazzy kind of thing, which she would have loved to ride. So I said, let us give him a surprise, and we'll put the bike and we'll cover it with a curtain. And we'll ask him to guess what is behind that curtain, right? And I told my wife that I'll have the camera and you draw the curtain, and I'll catch that expression in his eyes, on his face, the expression of delight, of surprise. So I was ready with the camera, everything was there. Then we called him and all, and then he was looking expectantly, and the curtain was removed. And then he looked, but he didn't have that surprise. There was something missing. He didn't have that sparkle. So he just smiled a little bit and he went away. Then I went to him and I said, Ani, क्या हुआ? तुमको अच्छी नहीं लगी bike? So he said, मैं सोच रहा था कि वो कुछ ही बैठे होंगे. So he thought that it was my father who would be waiting there, and that was a surprise. I can't tell you, Sujit, I had tears in my eyes, and I told that to my father. At the other end, he started crying, and around 12 days later, I took Aniket from school, got him home, and I said, enter the room. He entered the room, and my father was actually sitting there, and they rushed in each other's arms, and my dad cried and I cried. So this is a story which I wrote, and it has touched so many hearts. And it was from that single statement of Aniket, I thought, मुझे लगा कि मेरे आपूची पीछे बैठे होंगे पर्दे के. So that's how stories are born. And these are the stories which last forever because they are straight from the heart.
But isn't there often that, you sit down thinking that ab mujhe story likhna hai? I can understand that there are some stories that just come to you like the leaves come to a tree, right? To borrow an expression from John Keats. But I'm sure, don't you ever feel the pressure that you're expected to come out with a new story?
Yeah, that happens when, like, suppose there is this Children's Book Trust conducts a competition every few years, and I've bagged around 34 awards and all, which I think possibly is the highest over the years. So whenever they announce this competition, then it is like this, tighten the seatbelt and then write. Then I get into that zone. Okay, I decided I'm going to write a sports story. Sports story, I'm going to write cricket, right? It's going to be entertaining. It's got to have a value. But what about cricket? What should I write about cricket? Then can I write about somebody who's good at nothing, but because he changes his action, for example, something like that, but he's good at fielding, and at the last minute he throws because he's been playing this thing with seven stones. His aim is very good at playing marbles. He manages to crack the wicket and makes his team win. So that's his moment of triumph. Or something else. Should I write a folk tale? Should I write a fairy tale? I get into the zone and think and think and think. And usually, thanks to Lord Jagannath, something or the other always happens. I have never ever failed a deadline till now.
But you feel that more than those stories, you like the ones that come from the heart, like Babuji Piche Khade Hain.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, because they come directly from there.
So you mentioned an interesting thing that sometimes you decide that I want to write a story on cricket. So what are the subjects that you write on? You know, what are your stories based on?
Right on. I mean, like, if I start showing the books, it'll take time. I have written sports stories. That's my favorite genre. I've written fantasy. I've written folk tales. I've written mysteries. I've written value-based stories. I've written stories about girls who are, who refuse to be put down by the system. I've written about one of my favorite themes is about the underdog, because as a child I was bullied. I was very odd to look at, scrawny, puny. I looked like a monkey straight from a zoo or a circus. I used to get dragged to death. So I always love to write about the underdog. Then I love to write about canines. I don't like to call them dogs because Ramendra has done injustice to so many canines by saying kutte kamine tera khoon pee jaunga, tujhe kutte ki maut marunga. It has become a form of abuse. So I call them guppies, grown-up puppies. So my latest book is also on that, on my own Labrador. We have a Labrador at home. So I like to write about animals a lot. And in all these things, like nature, environment, but everywhere I want to, have a tiny value. When the child finishes the book, there is a takeaway someplace which is internalized, and a sense of hope is there. I don't like to write stories, very realistic kind of stories, which everybody else in the house dies and this fellow goes up the chimney and all that. No. Because already I feel there's so much of violence, there is so much of craziness happening. You see the daily news, there is so much of mess that is happening. So why should the child be at home? Sometimes there is so much of violence at home, or anger, or angst. So I like to end my story with a little bit of hope that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and the tunnel is not very long.
Interesting. We'll come back to many other points that you raised here, but the point that seems to be coming again and again in your responses is your personal engagement with the notion of values that are coming through, like empathy we talked about earlier. And that is something, but before we go into that, I want to also ask you, I'm sure I would like to have your response on this. I feel personally it's a tragedy that when we ask a child to respond to a particular book, invariably the child begins with "Humne ye seekha hai," or the moral of the story is this. So somewhere I feel, and when I look at, our libraries are set up entirely through book donations, and probably nowhere else in the world is the publishing industry of moral stories as strong as in India. You have a whole, many publishing houses have, a specific genre for children in children's books called moral stories, and they would advertise it as such, knowing that parents would lap them up. So do you feel, of course, there is no debating on the importance of morals, but do you think the way we try to, fix morals, that when a child reads a story, the child can only think in terms of not what I liked, how it touched me, or whatever, but rather in terms of what did I learn from it? Do we kind of force it down? Is it? Do you see this obsession with morals when it comes to children's books healthy?
The parents have this obsession, and that too, mainly the old school of thought parents. Now, if you see the publishing houses also like Penguin or Hachette and all,
They don't.
they have gone to the other extreme.
Yeah.
If you tell them there is a value, they'll run in the opposite direction. Right? So it is, and that's why the child has been doctored. The child has been doctored. That if anybody asks you, Munna, you should say the moral of the story is truth is right and right is truth. Like that. They've been fed. And that too is changing very, very fast. And I would not say morals. What I'm again saying is the value. There is a difference, and it's not thrust. And believe me, if the parents don't tutor their children, it is like me being tutored. Every time my wife asks me, "Khana kaisa bana hai?" अरे बहुत बड़ा बना है, ऐसा अच्छा खाना तो मैं कभी नहीं खाया, even if I have not tasted. So that kind of tutoring which is happening involuntarily, that anytime anybody asks and all, like good morning, mummy, good morning, papa, good morning, uncle, good morning, chadda auntie, like that. So that is, and it's soon fading away. My fear is the other way, where the publishing houses are so, obsessed by the Western influences that they say that you should not have any value. You should not have any, only entertainment, only fantasy. But even Harry Potter has got so many values. Why don't you realize that? You take the character of Harry. He's so upright. His parents, they are so upright. Then this thing, Hermione, and then Hagrid, Dumbledore, each of them stand for some value so strongly, and they win at the end. The good guy wins. So there's nothing wrong with that. And what you're talking about, the parents should, some publishing industry does run on this moral kind of thing. They are still stuck with the thought that if you say that Panchatantra, retold, people will buy it. I had gone to a publisher in the late 90s with my new manuscript. He looked at it and said that your English is good. Why don't you retell the Mahabharata and Ramayana? I said the Mahabharata and Ramayana have been retold at least 7,800 times each. He said, no, there's a market in Jakarta, Indonesia, Thailand, and all that. So I said, for retelling Mahabharata, you can get any MA English or BA English and all. Why do you need a creative person like me? I would like to write something new. He said, no, there's no market. So hopefully things will change, and things are changing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very important point you made, the distinction between morals and values. Values are, and as you have said, it's not necessarily thrust out. Values are that come out, the value of empathy, but you didn't teach the value of empathy to your daughter by saying ki, beti, is story se aapne empathy sikha ya nahi? So it was not like that. And I think that is something we need to take care of. Unfortunately, I would, because it's such a pet peeve for me, that I would like to say, we are unfortunately living in a society where we suffer from instruction overdose. We give so much instructions. Do this.
Beautiful phrase. Beautiful phrase.
Do this, do that,
overdose.
Don't do that. Then ek kaan se ghus ke dusre kaan se chala jata hai. And what is the point? I'll tell you a very interesting thing. We started this campaign to gift plants. You know that. When we started it in 2009, one of our volunteers said, let's have the slogan, Abbe sora gacha laga. The reason why he said this is, Gacha lagantu, Prithvi ko banchantu, these have all become cliches. So, plant a tree, save the world, ek kaan se ghus ke, dusre kaan se chala jata hai. So we didn't obviously use Abbe sora gacha laga, but that is where, and I would like to mention this, we decided to focus on the practice of gifting a plant, because if I gift a plant without saying any words, the message goes about the importance of planting trees. So I think we have to think about how do we communicate the values without making it in the face.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the minute you tell a child, do this, he'll do the opposite, or he'll sulk in the bathroom. And let me tell you one thing, Sujit, your this idea of gifting, I have liked it so much. I have loved it so much. I should thank you for that. That whenever I go as a chief guest or a chief speaker, I tell them, I do not want bouquets. I do not want any gift. If you really want to give me a token of your love and appreciation and gratitude, give me a sapling. And my wife loves gardening.
If not a book.
Pardon?
If not a book.
Yeah, if not a book, of course. Of course. So, and all those saplings are there in my garden, and they are flowering and blossoming, and our garden, is really appreciated by people.
Oh, nice. That's why, I'll just share the line that we use. We say, why give a gift that is dead? Like bouquets are dead flowers. Why not give a gift that grows? And a plant is the only gift that grows. The chocolates, they get over everything else, but this is the only gift that grows. But anyway, we won't talk about that. But, the point again that we have been talking about, like you mentioned about stories and these values, I tell you, when we set up the library and all these beautiful books came, like yesterday you sent us 4 cartons of books and many other books came. One thing I realized in a lot of international books is how necessarily, not necessarily in a verbal medium, values are transmitted. Like, I'll share this story. There was this book about a child packing her bag to go on a picnic. Now, nowhere in the narrative, in the textual narrative, does books come in. But the visuals show that when she packs her bag, she takes her toy, she also takes her favorite storybook when she goes on the picnic. I think we have to think about how do we communicate. It is very, there is no debating the fact, and I think Ramendra sir has been emphasizing this point. We need to, communicate values. There are values of empathy, about many other things, about, like you talked about Harry Potter and the values that, but Harry Potter does not teach us values by having a lesson at the end saying the moral of this chapter was this, or this is what we learned from this chapter. I think that is something that, we need to ensure.
I would like to add one thing, Sujit. You've raised a very interesting point. One great way of teaching humor. Nothing clicks like humor. You know my story, Paplu the Giant, right? It's full of fun. He grows up, his clothes don't grow up, and they rip. He's nangu pangu in the middle of the village. He runs, he gets a new dress and all that. But what is the value? The value is that I will fight without fighting. I'll not use violence. Throughout there is fun. And there have been more than 1,000 sessions performed on this in 26, 27 languages within the country and outside. And it's across languages. The thought is the same. That value is the same. Say no to violence, but in a fun way.
Exactly. It's so Gandhian, but without talking about Gandhi.
Without talking about Gandhi. So humor is a great connect. In fact, I feel that is one of the strongest connects. And in my storytelling, I try my best to be as funny as possible and get the message across.
Could you give us some other examples? You gave a wonderful example of Paplu the Giant, and you've also given earlier examples. But could you give us a couple of more examples of how you have tried to communicate values through your stories?
Like, there's one story of mine which is very popular. I think you've heard that. It's called By a Whisker, where this tigress is in love with the tiger's whiskers, right? And she's so obsessed that before she goes on a hunt, she counts his whiskers and comes back and counts them again and all that. And then this fellow's whisker goes away somewhere, so he tries to hunt for it. In that process, coconuts fall on his head and all, and he faints. And when he gets up, he thinks that he's a donkey and falls in love with a donkey, and he's almost, gets married to the donkey and all that. So it's a laugh riot from beginning to end. And here the value is that one should not obsess with anything. Like the lion, the tigress was obsessed with the whiskers of the tiger, not with the handsomeness of the tiger, the bravery of the tiger, the fun element in the tiger and all. And it doesn't come out anywhere in the story. But then that is the point which the author is trying to make. That obsession is something as trivial as whiskers or one whisker or two. So that I think humor is a great way of connecting. Another great way of connecting is relationships. When you talk about relationships, like mother, son, father, daughter, grandpa, grandchild and all, many times a lot of things come in the dialogues, in the behavior, without actually saying that this should be done, this should not be done. Yeah, like that curtain thing.
No, I completely agree. We have started, as you know, publishing picture books in Odia, and we wanted to publish a book on hand washing. And a naughty boy who's being told, wash your hands, but he does not listen to them. So he goes and eats something, goes and eats his samosas, goes and eats his berries, etc. But what happens is we introduce humor there. So inspired by Pinocchio, so whenever he eats something without washing his hands, one particular day, his stomach rumbles and starts growing. And finally it bursts. And then he wakes up realizing that it was a dream. Okay, but then, and immediately, but by, it was a dream and he was actually in the school, it was the midday meal. Involuntarily, he goes and picks up the morsel and then that nightmare comes to him. and then he goes and washes his hands. So we try to ensure that, we don't say ki se tara bhul bujhila ki ye hela. So it is automatically, that, it kind of becomes funny. But another thing that we did there, and I'm reminded of that by what you said, is because you also talked about creating certain kind of characters in your stories. So we try to ensure that of the book, the mother is not cooking at home. The father comes, because we try to break these stereotypes also. I think that is something I found you doing in your books also. Because I'll tell everyone, there's a wonderful curation called A Mighty Girl. There's a group based in the US, and they basically curate books and recommend books for mighty girls. Because many of our old stories have very submissive female characters as the protagonists. Like one of the folk tales from Odisha that we published, he wrote it. Now, by default in that folk tale, if a woman is single, she is a widow. So I said, no, let us not put it as a widow. So make these slight alterations, as if a single woman cannot exist, middle-aged woman without being a widow. So I think when we are retelling old tales or creating tales for children, we should not, I think the way Ramendra sir does is we need to rethink what are we communicating about the characters? What are we reproducing stereotypes that are established in society? Are we trying to break them? Because that is, I think, very important as writers today and in wanting to communicate values. Because could you tell a little about the kind of female characters that you've been creating?
See, one thing is this in Tales of Lord Jivin, that legend behind this Guru or Puja, that where Lakshmi teaches the two brothers a lesson, because she goes to a scheduled caste person and gives him alms or something. So she is banished from the house because Balabhadra tells Lord Jagannath that, she has committed a minor offense or sin or whatever. So there, Lakshmi is so powerful, so intelligent, so creative. So that tale I have used. And in many other stories of mine, I have a picture book of mine, which is called A Perfect Match, in which Dada and Dadi, they actually support two different teams. Dada and Dadi support two different teams. Dadaji supports the girls' team of jalebis, and Dadiji supports the boys' team of halwas. And Dadiji is shown as somebody really feisty, who sometimes uses kind of nowadays parliamentary language, and literally, and she's a better hockey player, and it's a laugh riot with the Dadiji coming out as strong-willed and with a great sense of humor.
I think, yeah, exactly. That is the point I'm talking about. That when we are talking about, so when as parents also, when we are selecting stories for children, are we, it's very important that we just don't lead them to any books. But of course, we allow them to explore. But then when we should help lead them towards stories that, empower them, that make them aspire and not see themselves particularly as weak or submissive. I think particularly I love the way, your particular fondness for the underdog, because that is something that so many children connect with. I'm sure, you write them with a certain warmth because you connect with them. You relate to those stories. And I know so many children who relate to stories of the underdog. I personally, for example...
This book of mine, sorry to interrupt you, is about a child who's got only one arm, right? He's in Calcutta. He settles down in Rourkela. I've created the entire ambience of Rourkela because I love this place. I want people to know small town is not what you think it is. Small town with a big, big heart, and it can produce wonders. So this guy joins, he's not allowed to play football because he's handicapped and all. He overcomes that challenge and becomes a football champion. So how does he do it? That is the story. A complete, absolute underdog. And the girl who helps him out is his friend, and she's the goalkeeper of her team. So the female characters are very, very strong, and not for the sake of, making them strong and all that. they are naturally strong. They blend into the story as strong, assertive, empathetic female characters.
Exactly. I think these are the kind of stories that we need to bring to our children, because the challenge that I face when children come to our library is very often they will go to the books that they are familiar with, they know. And I say that anyway you would have done that. If you've come here and there are so many books, allow me to guide you to discover some new books. And I think that is the role of anyone who's working with children, either as a parent or as a as someone like me working with children, as teachers or mentors or well-wishers. I think we need to guide them towards diverse kind of books, and particularly books that inspire them, and it's not just inspire, this is inspirational as well as teaching empathy. Point that you have been raising again and again. So I think that is something that we need to do. You have often talked about also not just values, but how, like here in the story that we talked about, teaching empathy, but along with that, stories also as healing, as having the power of healing. So could you tell a little about that? How can stories heal?
So this is a very special book of mine. It's called Stories of Resilience. Head of an NGO in Delhi. She's doing a wonderful, wonderful job. Yeah. So she approached me and she said that I can give you strands of stories from different girls who have suffered various kinds of torture and trauma. Can you create a story? But the identity of the girl should not come out. And I cannot tell you the full story. So she would just say that, oh, this girl was being tortured for dowry, or this girl was forced to get married at the age of 9. So the kind of stories which I came across was domestic violence, sexual abuse, physical abuse, early marriage, then drug abuse, every kind of torture and trauma you can imagine. So as I started writing those stories, believe me, it took me around 6-7 months, and I got into a kind of an emotional war. I had to take a break for a month almost before I could start writing again. Because you always feel that these things are happening elsewhere, in Delhi, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. But no, they're happening right here, right now, possibly in the slum in front of my house, or in the neighbor's garage, or in my own outhouse. And we have no idea at all about these things. We are like the ostriches. No, it's not happening. It's happening in India today when Rajiv Sardesai is, taking an interview, or when Arnab Goswami is out of the jail and taking some other interview and all that. So those kind of things, So what I was trying to tell is that by reading these stories, these are stories of resilience. If girls of 8, 9, 10, and 11 facing this kind of torture on a daily basis, day in and day out, with no hope in sight, can survive, can triumph over the most difficult of odds, why can't you and I? So this book is dedicated to the girl child whose hopes are smothered, smashed, and smudged, but who still has wings to fly, and she's flying.
Yeah, very, very, very powerful. I can imagine, people who have gone through these trauma, reading these books. And I think first is, it's very important for any child. I think when we talk about inclusive education, what is important is, does a child or any person feel represented in the imaginary world that you are encountering? Do you find characters who have names like you? We feel so happy when we find a Mahapatra or a Patnaik in any of the stories that we are reading. So are the characters talking about experiences that you can relate with? So do you find yourself represented in the literature? I think that is when we talk about children and literature, like these young girls, if you had probably not written their stories, maybe they would never have found their voices. They are not writing, but they feel now that their voice is coming out. that others can empathize with them thanks to your stories. And that itself has a power to heal. The feeling that you are being heard. I think the notion that people are hearing you has a great healing power.
Absolutely. And a couple of adults had written, more than a couple, I think half a dozen adults had written to Sonal, saying that when we started reading these stories, we were crying because something like this has happened to us. And they are upper middle class, highly educated people working in good places and all that. But this is, it's cutting across all genres, all categories, all
Abuse.
lifestyles, So that's where the connect happens. And once the connect happens, the healing starts.
I'll tell you a very interesting story of books and stories and healing that we had experienced. So in 2008, the Kandhamal riots had happened, and Bakul was just a year old that time. We were very small, very few volunteers. All we had was books. Now there was a refugee camp in YMCA in Bhubaneswar, where there were about 500 people cooped up in a hall with more than 100 children. And one of our volunteers had been there and told us about it and said, let's do something. We thought we should do something because the children are cooped up there with no engagements. So we thought, what can we do? And we thought, okay, we have a library. Let us go with books and see what we can do. But we were very apprehensive because we thought we are Hindus. There were Christians who had, run away from their homes. We said, see, who was correct, who was wrong? We don't want to get into that. It's a fact that there are children, small children who had to flee their homes in the middle of the night, run through the jungles and come here. This is definitely and we do. So we went with books, and every day for a month, we would open our library, get them to read books, tell them stories. Now, after a month, one child asked me, he was about 10 years old, he asked me, Sujit bhai, tumme amma pai ette kain ki korucho? Why are you doing all this for us? We are not doing anything for you. Ame to kichi korunu. Tumme kaun pai korucho? Acha tumme to Hindu. Tumme kain ki korucho? Now, we had never till then talked about peace. We had never raised the question of what had happened to them. We were just going there with books, giving them books, telling them stories, interacting with them on a religious basis every day. Now, the fact that we were doing it could raise questions in their mind, because I'm sure staying there, they would have been seething with feelings of revenge that Hindus are like this, we must leave this place and then go and kill them. But the thought that good people exist, the thought that, goodness also exists, the thought that their stereotypes, their conditioning needs to be interrogated, we felt that we had contributed to peace. That was, even now, it is one of my, moments of greatest pride in all that we have done. The feeling about, because we felt that we could heal them through stories. And I'll tell you another interesting thing that happened. After 2 months of this, then the parents requested कि अब बच्चे तो school नहीं जा रहे हैं, can you do a camp school? So we kind of got volunteers and we ran a camp school. Now one day I went, and this lady, more than 85 years old, probably 85 years old, she comes to me and says, Amma pain kaun hai la? And then I realized that ये जो हम stories बोलते थे, ये जो खेल वेल करते थे, this play that we had, this also had a therapeutic effect on the elders, though they were not directly our beneficiaries. Seeing the children read, they were also reading books, they were also listening to the stories. Now, those stories we thought were for children, but it was having a tremendous healing effect on the adults also, which we realized later. So I think there is no, there's no way we can belittle the value of healing that stories and books can do.
I would like to add, you raised a very interesting point. I'm from Hyderabad. In Hyderabad, Hindu-Muslim riots are very common. But my best friend is a Muslim, and we eat from the same plate. We studied for engineering together. We had a room in my house where he would do namaz. We are that close. So, but this undercurrent is always there in Hyderabad, like in other places, in many other places. So I wrote this story about a Muslim chaatwala who sells chaat on his cycle, and a Hindu guy, a Hindu boy. Hindu boy's name is Raju. He's around 11 or 12. And this guy, the Muslim chartwala, is tall and hefty and bearded like Bud Spencer and all that. And his cry is, I mean, the way he calls out is, Nampali, Lingampali, Malapali, Nampali, Lingampali, Tirupali, Patapali, Rampali, time pass, Chanapali, time pass, Chanapali, time pass ke liye Chanapali khao. So this guy is very fascinated by him and all. So every day after school, this fellow is the rickshaw puller's son. So he has some 25, then those days, 1 rupee or something, he buys that time pass. And then this fellow who's selling that, his name is this thing, Khadir. So what Khadir says is that he gives a name to that chana phali. He says, देखो बेटा ये है KBC चना फली. So then Raju says, क्या ये खाने से हम करोड़पति बनेंगे? खाने से करोड़पति. So one day his granny comes to know, Raju's granny comes to know that this fellow is a Muslim. She says that no, you should not eat from a Muslim's hand and all. They might poison you because my son was killed by a Muslim and all that. So this fellow says that no, I will continue. His friends also say that no, you should not have such hassles. You should. So then there's a riot in this place in Hyderabad. So these people, Raju and his family, are going in that rickshaw. And they are stopped by, some huge, loud voice, gruff voice asks them to stop and come out. So this fellow recognizes that it is the time pass uncle. So the time pass uncle takes them, puts them in safety, and he actually saves these guys. Otherwise, he was thinking of killing them and taking the rickshaw. And
I think you're muted.
This is auto mute. I think Trump must have done this. Donald Trump doesn't like me. So this fellow saves his life, the family's life. And then at the end, Raju's mother thanks him. Ki, Bhaijan, thank you for saving our life. So he says that तुम मेरे को भाई बोलती हो और thank करती हो. Then he says that मेरे लड़के को उठा के दीवार पे हिंदू ने फेंक के मारा था. But इसका मतलब ये नहीं, मैं आपके लड़के को अपना लड़का समझता हूँ. So that was the connect. You know, what I was trying to say is that all these are silos, mental silos, you know, that this person is a Muslim, this person is a Christian, this person is this. At least let us save our children from this kind of poison, which is again seems to be, you know, kind of growing wherever.
Yeah. I think, Hindu Babu, I think, please mute Karantu, because I think we are missing out Ramendra ji. Can we have Ramendra ji back on screen?
Yeah, I can see myself.
Okay, yeah. Now I can see you as well. Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there is so much that one can go into. I think we will take questions, but before that, you know, the point that I raised earlier, and I think the point that everyone talks about when any discussion on literature happens today, the question of print versus digital, you know, that comes in. No, and how do you see? Do you think the digital medium is a threat to reading, or do you think that it is just a change in the way we are engaging with literature, and we can just make the most of it, or do you think that the digital medium has become a threat to reading? And
it's not a threat to reading because one needs to adapt. Now we are adapting to webinars. In the last 3 months, it's been raining webinars on me. You know, I've had 20, 30 webinars and all that. So I've adapted. The first time when I came on screen, I didn't know which button, what, where, and all that. But now I'm reasonably comfortable in all that. So like my kids, they read on Kindle. I don't like it. And I keep telling them, a book is a book. You can't take Kindle to bed. You can't take a laptop to bed. But I can take a book to bed and read, you know, the whole night. So one needs, this is a new medium. That's it. So books might continue, might not continue for a long time, but reading as a habit.
I think that's a very important point that you mentioned, that, you know, even when we're moving from a print medium to a digital medium, I still have to read on the screen, right?
Absolutely.
I cannot do away with it, you know. And that reminds me, this is not new. I mean, this threat has always been there. For example, when we moved from orality to literacy, from an oral culture to particularly the printed book, I'm sure people, and when instead of a handwritten manuscript to a mechanized, a factory product, which is like a printed book, at that time, people would have lamented the way we are lamenting the loss of that comfort, book, that we're talking about. I'm sure that time people have, the beauty of the handwriting, the parchment or the palm leaves or whatever. Instead of that, you have this engineered product, which looks the same. Every product looks the same. So people would have lamented it. So this is another change that is coming. But having said that, I'll tell you, sir, I realize that, there's one thing with the printed book which the digital medium cannot do. And that is coming back is about empathy and sharing. Because I'll tell you why. Because as you know, the interesting thing about our libraries is all the books are donated. So the books have two stories in them. There's a story that is printed on the book, and there's a story as to how the book has come to the library. And the fact that you have shared your books with our readers, hoping that they will be inspired the same way or they will benefit the same way that you have benefited. That culture of that bonding that books create, because if I wear the hand-me-down of my father, there's a bond there, because it's like stepping into my father's shoes, stepping into his shirt, his pant, reading his books. I think with the digital medium, it just becomes all the more impersonal. It is not, if you share a PDF with me, I will not think it is Ramendra ji's PDF. It is a PDF. But with the physical books that you sent yesterday and the books that you sent earlier, I always feel they are Ramendra ji's books that came to me.
No, that aspect definitely is there. I totally agree. A story and a story.
Yeah. And for example, one of our volunteers, when she was cataloging books here, Bahuadi, you've met her, she found a book which was donated at a wedding 20 years back in Kolkata, which she had attended. Not only that, I'll tell you a story that made me cry. So there was a young boy, about 18 years old. Unfortunately, he committed suicide for whatever reason. Now, his father decided to donate most of his books to our library. And the books mentioned in memory of so-and-so, birth and his date of death. Now, a young reader came to our library, a young doctor, and she happened to go to all the titles that she had loved as a child. And invariably on all those books, she found it written in memory of this boy. And she wrote a very moving letter saying that I don't know you, but I know that you are of the age, you would have been as old as my younger brother. But I can see you from the books that you read. And I can imagine what kind of a person you were. And I really feel sad that you're not there to enjoy more books. And reading that letter actually made me cry. And I realized that these connections that happen between people who are lovers of books themselves. So I think the kind of empathy that you develop, I mean, people talk about bottle friends, but I think book friends are as strong or if not stronger than bottle friends.
Yeah, bottle friends, I have no idea. Because the only bottle I use is Pepsi sometimes. But yes, and you just reminded me of one thing. Like my father, now he's no more. He passed away 12 years back. So I had presented him a book, like all books, of course. So there he read this book, and in the margin he always used to write that इस कहानी में श्याम का चरित्र in Hindi बहुत अच्छा लगा. ये कहानी ऐसी है वैसी है. I have still kept it. So that PDF, you said no PDF to PDF. If you send me a PDF, nothing would remain. But this book is the most valuable, one of the most valuable positions, because it has my dad's writing and his thoughts about my writing on that page.
Yeah. So I think shall we have some questions now? I think we have probably 12 minutes left. Dr. Dash, do we have some questions?
Yes, one question, if I'm audible to you.
Yeah.
One question has come from Sri University. So the initial discussion was that we should inculcate certain values, and and then children normally look at values as practiced by parents, not imposed by parents. So the how a child will understand the disjunction between values taught and values practiced? Does that put more pressure on parents, or do they have to moderate their values?
Very interesting. I remember, sir, you have to answer this question, but I remember a child in school many years back telling me that in my school they're telling me to do this, but I know that they're doing this. Why should I listen to them? But yes, Ramendra sir, I think you should.
I won't talk about any comparison. I'll say something very simple. You have to show, not tell. You have to practice the values you believe in. And because the book is saying that you should practice, no, you should believe. Every family should have I was reading somewhere, should have a value statement. Like if I say my family's value statement is empathy. Sujit, your value statement would be what? You can say something, right? So, and you should not you need not tell the child, like in my case, that this is our value system, practice it, do this, do that. No, simply live it, man. You live it, and the child will follow you. No questions asked. Whatever values I've got today have all come from my father. Absolutely every value, whether it's empathy or resilience or transparency or whatever, honesty. I have tried my best to be honest, you know, reaching out to the underdog, whatever happens, even at the risk of risking your reputation or whatever, your career or whatever. I've fought for my junior colleagues, even though I knew I was going to get a bad rating and all that, because I saw my father doing it on a day in and day out basis. So please know your values, live your values, practice your values, and your child will follow.
I'll just repeat, very important point that he said about, I'll just reiterate that about doing it, because the same with me, my parents, so what I saw them practicing, I don't remember what they told me, but I remember what I saw them practice. And that is the real values. And I'll repeat my phrase, which you love, which is, please, I request everyone, let us not overdo the instructional overdose, because the important things that we want to tell also don't get communicated, because they get drowned in the sea of all these things that we say without meaning it, because we don't do it ourselves. So any other question do we have, Dr. Das?
No, I have a simple question, because I just
Your
wanted
question
to.
cannot be simple. Please don't lie.
Hey, please ask very complicated questions.
Okay. So,
Because you're a professor, so you should ask complicated things.
No, I know him well enough to know that his question is not simple. Okay.
the question is that why writing on children, because most often are about values and morals and stories, but most often not about telling men and women of like parents and society's leadership and business leaders and government to do certain things, because most stories are all about how play happened, how fought. So this is all about, and as if literature refers to only what people can study in MA in English, so or MA in Hindi. My point is, that is why we did Kalinga Literary Festival a few years ago. We put it literary, which means the process of experiencing. So human beings are experiencing so many things. I think, Ramendra sir, you have tried to capture more diverse of emotions among children. But why we don't have many more children writers writing on people, people writing on children?
Now they are coming up. If you would just take a look at the number of publishing houses who are exclusively publishing for children or have a division publishing for children, more and more children's writers are coming. So the scenario is changing very, very fast. Earlier, it used to be that we didn't have many publishers, and I think writing for children, I think, is sometimes more difficult. That's what others tell me. I don't find it difficult, but they say that you have to, like once I had gone to a seminar in Delhi, So there was this very impressive lady from the American Library who was telling people who was telling children's writers how to write for children. So she said, look, ladies and gentlemen, when you write for children, go down to the level of children. So I raised my hand during the Q&A. So she looked at me. She was pedigreed. I was completely non. Where are you from? I said, Rourkela. She hadn't heard of Rourkela and all. Okay, ask your question. So I said, ma'am, it's an observation. I think what you said was great. You should keep their sensibilities in mind. You only got the direction wrong. You don't have to go down to the level of children. You have to rise up to the level of children, because children are the closest to God, and God is up there, not down here. During the tea break, she was running after me with her visiting card. So people, I think, don't write for children for this reason, because they don't understand the sensitivity, the sensibility. Children are closest to God. They are innocence personified. They are far more intelligent, curious, and observant than you. But you are trying to patronize. I think the biggest sin any writer can make, children's writer, is to patronize children. Never do that. Or any parent, never patronize a child. I keep telling that in begging people not to patronize children. So they find writing for children difficult. They feel that they have to go down to the level of children, or use a vocabulary which is very, very simple, or God knows what else. But believe me, Professor, the times are changing very, very fast. And soon we'll have a plethora, and you'll have a session of Kalinga Literature Festival only for children's writers. And hopefully you'll invite me.
Yes, definitely. That is a fantastic thing to do.
I think there's a question from Suman Pusti. How is literature shaping future and personality of children in the era of digitization?
See, literature and digitalization, they're not at cross purposes. No. Through digitalization also, we are disseminating literature. Like you have websites, you have Kindle, you have... So that things are happening in a big way. But my only complaint against some of my fellow writers or some of my fellow publishers is that please don't look at the market. Look at the society. I know it sounds very Manoj Kumarish or very, like I'm giving a bhashan and all that. I'll give you a small example. During COVID, what did COVID teach us? COVID taught us one important lesson, again, about empathy. And it said that this empathy is not with other human beings alone. It's also with nature. Because when COVID happened, nature came out and reclaimed its domain. Like the cheetahs outside, the penguins outside, the deer strutting around and jumping around and all. And it did without violence. Sujit, there was no violence by the animals. But when we indulge in violence, we are intruders. And we have never learned that lesson. Now we have this thing called zoonotics, where we start domesticating wildlife, because of which this pandemic happened. Already we had this instance in China, and then it went everywhere and all that. Now there are 60 such species which are being experimented with of wild life, So when are we going to learn to empathize with nature? When are we going to learn that we are not the owners of the environment? We are simply the custodians, and we have to pass it on to the next generation. You are doing such a wonderful job with these trees and saplings and all that. Do you think if we continue like this, will we have a future? We're not going to have a future. We are running against time, and we are not realizing that at all. The biggest threat today is to the environment. And these kind of sensitivities need to be, you should help children internalize these sensitive issues. Otherwise, we have no future.
In fact, I would like to mention here, since this session is part of a larger dialogue on the Sustainable Development Goals, earlier the UN had the Millennium Development Goals, okay, and then they were rephrased, and we had the new version, the Sustainable Development Goals, because the realization was the world over that these development goals mean nothing unless we talk about sustainable development. Because otherwise we think that we'll have factories, increase the GDP, increase the, but if, I build a big house in Bhubaneswar, but if it is not livable to live in the city, if I cannot get out of my house without keeping the AC on, then what is the point? If I can't take a walk on the streets, if I don't enjoy the breeze, then what is the point of this life? I mean, so many people now are preferring to stay in smaller towns like Bhubaneswar, Rourkela than Delhi because of the pollution, the smog. So I think it is so important, the point about environment that you are making, and which is so important in the context of the sustainable development goals that we're talking about in this debate. But I'll just add one point to what Mr. Prusti asked about digitization. Something like, sir, I think I mentioned that. So in Bakul Foundation, it happened, as sir said, you adapt. So our library is closed. So we started many of the activities that we used to do at the library, we started doing it in the online medium, in the digital medium. So we have storytelling in which we travel to different countries every Saturday at 9 p.m. Storytelling in Odia, in which sir was there recently. Robbie Bar, Goppa Bar, again at 9 p.m. Now the interesting thing is, now what happened in the process is, we were probably getting 30, 40, 50 children to our library when the storytelling happened. But when we went digital, we could actually reach out to hundreds of children. I think, sir, your video had 2,000, 3,000 views on YouTube. Not only that, so many children are now writing to us saying, or many parents have written to us, that the child has started becoming a reader now thanks to these storytelling sessions. And that gives us so much hope and so much pleasure. So I think it's a question of, what we are trying to talk about, the importance of creating lifelong learners, importance of creating readers. I think both of us, if there is one takeaway from this session for anyone listening to it, it should be that if we really want to educate the child, then let us make them independent learners. Let us create this love for reading, love for books in them. I think that will take them. And let us provide access, of course. So, sir, your last piece of advice or tips for children and parents, and I think we'll end with that.
I would just tell the parents, because children are the wisest, should I say, creatures or lovely things on planet Earth. They don't need any advice, but parents need hell of a lot of advice. Please do petition. It really doesn't matter whether she's first in class or second in maths or third in science and all. As long as she's a happy, comfortable, empathetic human being, your goal is achieved. Just remember that. Don't push her too hard. Teach her, and you also do. Only one thing, live in the present moment. As Sri Ravi Shankar says, no regrets of the past, no anxiety for the future. Just live in the present moment. Jai
Thank you so much. Dr. Dash, over to you.
Thank you so much for a fascinating session of reflection, of discussion.
Sorry, I don't think you're audible, Dr. Dash.
Am I audible?
Yeah, better now.
So, thank you so much for a fantastic session of self-reflection, of interactivity.
Now?
Yeah, this is better. I think you removed that.
So that is how technology works at times. A fantastic session of self-reflection, interactivity, experiential learning, sharing your own experience. And this was kind of a master class for how to write on children as well. So both people who are engaged in children's lives, in their curiosity, in taking them forward, sometimes learning from them, sometimes teaching them in a way, and kind of a mutual relationship that symbiotically developed between children and these two gentlemen who actually graced the occasion today. So very fortunate to have Ramendra Kumar, considered one of the top writers of from India in the world, and Sujit Mahapatra, considered as a top philanthropist and youth icon of Odisha and known throughout for his Bakul Foundation work. So we are incredibly fortunate to have you. While thanking everyone, I would like to thank the IT team and MPC Sujit Kumar sir's office, led by Swadesh and Sunil. Thank you so much. And partners, Sri Sri University, Xavier University, and Kalinkusum Foundation. So it was exciting, and I'm sure people who have been watching on Facebook, their notepad, note and pen were ready to take notes how to become a writer. So over to Mahapatra to say thank you, and we're extremely grateful that you could come and spare valuable 90 minutes with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.